The escape pod shook hard as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Fire wrapped around the small metal shell as it dropped from space like a stone. Inside, Lieutenant Jake Allen gripped the handles tightly, his knuckles white. The screen blinked. Red, warning lights flashing everywhere. System failure, the pod's voice said again and again. Jake's voice was lost in the noise as he shouted for control. But it was too late. The pod was falling, and fast, with a loud crash. The pod slammed into the jungle floor. Metal bent, smoke rose, and silence followed. Bird-like creatures screamed from the trees and flew away. The jungle, tall and glowing with strange colors, slowly went quiet again. Inside the broken pod, Jake groaned and moved. Blood ran down his forehead, but he was alive. He reached for the emergency kit and crawled out. The air was thick and warm, full of strange smells. Huge trees reached high above him, their leaves glowing faint blue. The ground was soft, covered in moss that pulsed like it was breathing. Jake looked around, but he saw no sign of other people. He was alone, on a planet he didn't recognize. His ship had been shot down during a mission near an unknown sector. The rest of the crew was either dead or missing. He checked his tools, only a weak flashlight, a broken scanner, and half a protein bar. His radio was dead, and the pod's beacon was crushed. He started walking, hoping to find shelter or maybe water, but something felt wrong. The jungle was too quiet. There were no bugs, no animal calls, only wind and rustling leaves. Then he saw them giant footprints in the mud. Each one was the size of his body. Wide and deep. Jake froze, his heart pounding. He bent down to touch one of the prints. Still fresh, the edges were wet, the mud still sliding. Whatever made these prints was huge, and nearby. He backed away slowly, careful not to make noise. He turned and started walking the other way, fast but silent. But the ground suddenly shook beneath his feet. Thump, thump. He hid behind a tree, holding his breath. The footsteps were coming closer, slow and heavy. A huge shape moved between the trees, taller than a house. Jake saw long dark hair, thick limbs, and a flash of sharp teeth. It looked part human, part beast, its eyes glowing yellow in the shadows. He pressed his back against the tree, trying to stay still. The creature sniffed the air, turned its head slightly, and growled low. Jake didn't move, didn't even blink. The giantess stepped closer, her foot landing just inches from him. He could smell her, earth, blood, and something sweet like flowers. She turned away suddenly and walked into the trees. The ground shook with each step, but slowly the sound faded. Jake collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. What was that thing? Was it hunting him, or just passing by? Night came fast on this strange planet. Jake found a tree with thick roots and made a small shelter under it. He didn't light a fire. He didn't want the giant to see him again. He sat in the dark, chewing the half-protein bar slowly. The jungle lit up with tiny glowing bugs, but still no sounds of animals. He thought about the footprint, the glowing eyes, the growl. She was real, and she was close. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the giantess again. Her size, her teeth, her slow steps. He couldn't tell if she was animal or intelligent being. Maybe both. In the middle of the night, a deep howl echoed through the jungle. Jake sat up fast, heart racing. It wasn't her voice, but it was big and angry. Another one? Or something worse? He held his small knife tight, even though he knew it wouldn't help much. The ground rumbled once more, but this time it was moving away. Something else was out there. By morning, Jake made a decision. He had to learn what this place was. He had to survive, not just run. The giantess was not the only danger here, but she was the first, and he had a feeling he would see her again. Jake opened his eyes to find himself hanging upside down. Thick vines held his ankles tight, and the world spun slowly as he swayed back and forth. Blood rushed to his head, making it hard to think. The jungle looked different from up here, farther from the ground, closer to the sky. At first, he thought it was a nightmare. Then he remembered the giant footprints, The glowing eyes, the growl. She had found him. Branches creaked nearby, heavy and slow. A large shadow moved between the trees, blocking out the light. Jake's breath stopped as he saw her again. The giantess stepped into view, her hair falling like a curtain over her shoulders. Her skin was a mix of earth tones, and her eyes locked onto him with deep curiosity. She was even bigger up close, her body strong, her face both fierce and strange. She sniffed the air and leaned closer, her warm breath brushing against Jake's face. He didn't scream, he couldn't. Her eyes narrowed. Then she opened her mouth and let out a low growl. Jake froze, expecting teeth, pain, the end. Instead, she reached into a satchel made of animal skin and pulled out a fruit. She held it near his mouth, waiting. He hesitated, unsure if it was food or some kind of test, but hunger pushed him forward, and he took a small bite. The fruit was sour and sticky, but not deadly. The giantess watched him chew, then gave a slow nod. She untied the vines and caught him as he fell. Jake landed in her hand, her fingers thick but careful. She didn't crush him, she held him like something precious, or something very fragile. He looked up at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a monster. He saw eyes full of questions. And maybe something else. She placed him on the ground gently and sat cross-legged nearby. Her sighs shook the earth when she moved, but she stayed still. Jake backed away slowly, his instincts telling him to run, but his legs didn't move. He felt like prey, but something in her behavior didn't match. She hadn't hurt him, hadn't roared or bitten. She fed him, watched him, and now she waited. Jake picked up a stick and drew a circle in the dirt. He pointed to himself and then the circle. The giantess tilted her head. Confused, she mimicked him, pointing to herself and then drawing a much larger circle. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. They began a silent exchange of shapes and gestures. Hours passed, the sun moved, and neither of them left. At one point, she brought him a piece of cooked meat. Jake stared at it, nervous. What kind of animal was it? He smelled it, poked it, then took a bite. It was rich, smoky, and tasted like game meat. Again, she nodded with a pleased look on her face. She wasn't feeding him like a pet, she was offering him something. Jake started to understand. She wasn't a beast wandering the jungle. She had tools, food, clothing, and a kind of patience that no predator had. She was something more, maybe a person, maybe a hunter. But she wasn't trying to eat him, not yet. Still, the fear stayed under his skin. He was alone on her land, in her world, and nothing about this planet made sense. Night came again, but this time, she didn't leave. She built a fire and made a circle of stones around it. Jake sat nearby, always watching her hands, her movements. She drew in the dirt again, simple pictures of moons, stars, and what looked like stick figures. Some of the figures looked like humans. Jake pointed at them with wide eyes. She looked at him carefully, then tapped the picture twice. Was she trying to say she knew humans? Had she seen others like him before? Or was she just drawing stories from her imagination? Jake didn't know, but he felt something shift inside him. She wasn't just a giantess, she was trying to tell him something. The wind blew softly as the fire crackled. Above them, the sky turned dark blue and showed twin moons rising. Jake lay on the soft moss, looking at the stars. The giantess sat nearby, humming a sound that echoed like wind through caves. It was low, peaceful, and oddly familiar. Jake closed his eyes but stayed alert. Tomorrow he would try to ask more. Try to learn her name, if she had one. But deep in his mind, one question stayed. If she didn't want to eat him, what did she want from him? Jake woke to the sound of leaves moving in a strange rhythm. It wasn't the wind. It was a pattern, like a message in nature's breath. He sat up and looked around, and there she was again. The giantess stood at the edge of a small clearing. Her back turned, she moved her hands slowly through the air, almost like she was dancing. But there was no joy in it. It felt more like a memory, or a story being told without words. Jake stayed quiet, watching her closely. She didn't know. He was awake, Or maybe she didn't care. Her body moved with power, yet with control. She ended the strange motion with a stomp, and the earth shook just a little. Then she turned her head slightly, and Jake saw her face. There was sadness in her eyes, as if something far away was still. Very close in her mind, he stood slowly and walked toward her with his hands up. She didn't move, didn't run or growl, just waited. Jake pointed to her, then mimicked her movement. Trying to copy the pattern, he failed, of course. But she made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a laugh. She touched her chest and said something that sounded like Ratha. Jake pointed at her and repeated, Ratha. She nodded slowly, but then shook her head, and said it again, this time clearer, Thalara. So that was her name, Thalara. The giantess who didn't eat him, who watched him, who shared food in silence. Jake pointed at himself. Jake, she repeated in a strange tone. Yuck, close enough, he thought, and smiled. She didn't smile back, but her eyes softened. And that was something. As the sun rose higher, Thalara led Jake through the jungle. She walked slowly, letting him keep up, though her legs could cross 3 times his distance in one step. He noticed she walked along a specific path, marked by stones and symbols carved into tree bark. She knew this place well, like someone who had walked it hundreds of times. They came to a hill covered in thick vines, and with one motion of her hand, she pulled the greenery aside. Behind it, a hidden door of stone appeared, covered in moss and glowing symbols. Thalara pressed her hand against the surface, and the stone slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a wide cave lit by crystals in the walls, casting pale light in soft colors. Jake followed her in, eyes wide, mouth open. On the cave walls were drawings, some old, some new, all strange. He saw tall beings like Thalara, standing beside humans, not fighting, not running, but building something together, a bridge, a tower, a machine he couldn't tell, but it looked important. He turned to Thalara and pointed at the images, then at himself. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She moved to a wall and picked up an object, dusted it off, and handed it to him. It was a broken piece of metal with Earth letters on it. It said EXP-09 Titan Division. Jake's heart skipped. That was a human expedition marker decades old. From a mission that vanished without a trace. He stepped back, breathing fast. Others had been here before him, maybe long ago. And now he was part of something he didn't understand yet. Thalara walked to the far end of the cave and placed her hand on another wall. This time a soft hum filled the air, and something came to life. A small light floated from the wall and formed a figure in the air, a hologram. It showed a human standing next to a giantess. Shaking hands behind them, stars moved in slow motion. And then a flash, something exploded. Thalara watched the image closely. Her face unreadable. Jake stared too, trying to understand. There had been peace once, or at least connection, then. Something broke it, and now, after all this time, he was here. Was it fate? Accident? Or had he been led here somehow? Thalara touched the wall again, and the hologram disappeared. She turned to Jake and made a gesture, her hand over her heart, then toward him. He didn't know what it meant exactly, but it felt like a promise. Something ancient had started again. And she was asking if he would be part of it. Jake looked at her, at the cave, at the glowing symbols. He nodded, slowly, and in that moment, without speaking the same language, they understood each other. She wasn't just a giantess, she was a survivor of something bigger than him. And now he was no longer just a lost soldier. He was the only human who had ever come back. The rain fell gently from a red sky as Jake followed Thalara into the deeper parts of the forest. Leaves above glowed faintly with soft light, like stars. Caught in branches, the path grew narrow, the air heavy, and the sounds of the jungle faded until there was only silence. Thalara walked ahead with slow steps, carrying something wrapped in old cloth. Jake didn't ask what it was, but the way she held it told him it mattered. She stopped at a wall of stone covered in symbols, some scratched deep, others fading with time. Without a word, she reached forward and pressed her hand against a shape that looked like a spiral sun. The ground trembled, and a hidden doorway opened with a deep breath-like sound. Inside was a tunnel, curved like the inside of a ribcage, and lit by glowing crystals set in the walls. Jake hesitated, but Thalara looked back and gave him a slow nod. He stepped in, feeling the strange warmth of the crystals on his skin. The tunnel led them to a large chamber where the ceiling looked like a night sky frozen in stone. All around them were machines, long dead but not forgotten. Rusty parts, blinking lights, shattered panels with human writing on them. Jake moved closer to a control board and brushed off dust. His eyes widened when he saw a small screen flicker. Weakly, he touched it, and the screen blinked blue before going dark again. Thalara stood beside him, then unwrapped the object she had carried. It was a strange device, half metal, half stone, with a human port on one side and alien symbols on the other. She placed it gently into a slot in the control panel, and the whole room pulsed with light. A soft hum filled the air, as if the room itself was waking from a long sleep. A projection rose from the center of the chamber. Shaky but clear enough, it showed a human wearing an old spacesuit, standing beside a giantess who looked just like Thalara. The human spoke in broken alien speech, and the giantess replied in careful English. Jake stepped closer, trying to hear the words. Peace, made. Broken, the human said. Warning. Danger returns, the giantess said. Then the image faded and silence returned. Jake turned to Thalara, trying to understand. She walked to one of the walls and placed her hand on a section that lit up with star maps. Lines connected stars, forming a shape one Jake recognized from old navigation charts. It was Earth's star system, surrounded by red markers, threat signs, blinking slowly like a heart monitor. Jake realized something terrible. This place wasn't just a cave. It was a warning station, left behind by humans who never returned home. Thalara walked to a corner of the chamber and knelt beside a broken statue. It was shaped like a child, half human, half giant, with open hands and a hopeful face. She stared at it with such sorrow that Jake felt his chest tighten. He knelt beside her and touched the base of the statue. A name was carved into the stone in both English and alien script. Unity. Jake whispered the word, and Thalara looked at him. With deep, ancient eyes, she placed her hand over his and held it there for a moment. The silence said more than words ever could. She had lost people, just like he had. But more than that, she had waited for him, or someone like him. Jake stood slowly and looked around the room again. Most of the machines were dead, but some still hummed with faint life. He moved to a small console and connected his portable tool to it. The data on the screen scrolled in both languages, and one word kept flashing in red. Arrival. He turned to Thalara, pointing at the word. She didn't answer, but walked back to the entrance of the chamber and listened. Jake followed her, unsure what she was sensing. Then he heard it too deep rumbling in the ground, like thunder under their feet. The forest outside groaned, trees bending, animals scattering. Something was coming, something big, not Thalara, not like her. Jake looked back at the map on the screen. The red markers were moving slowly but surely toward Earth. This wasn't just about old stories or lost missions. It was about survival, and whatever had broken the peace long ago was on its way back. He turned to Thalara and said her name, not as a question, but as a promise. She looked at him, and for the first time, she spoke clearly. Not in alien speech, but in a voice shaped for humans. They come for war, she said, and the last light in the chamber flickered out, leaving only their breath in the dark. The trees screamed before the creatures did. Jake had never heard trees make that sound before. A deep creaking, like bones breaking under pressure. Thalara grabbed his arm and pulled him back, her steps fast, her eyes sharp. Whatever was coming through the jungle was not trying to be quiet. Branches cracked, birds vanished, and the ground trembled like it was afraid. Jake looked back at the ancient cave as its entrance slowly sealed behind them, hiding the past again. Now they were in the present, and the danger was near. Thalara pushed through the thick forest, guiding Jake with purpose. Her pace was faster than before, urgent. Wild, like instincts had taken over, she didn't speak, but her grip on Jake's arm told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't the first time she had run like this. They reached a small ridge overlooking the valley below, and what? Jake saw froze his breath. Dark figures moved below, not giant like Thalara, but large enough, covered in armor that shimmered like oil in shadows, their faces hidden under masks that glowed red. They weren't animals, they weren't mindless. They were organized, moving in groups. Spreading out searching, Jake counted at least 20 of them, each carrying weapons shaped like bone and metal. He whispered, "Who are they?" But Thalara didn't answer. She only stared with a look that mixed anger and fear emotions. He had never seen together on her face before. She pulled him down behind a rock and crouched low. One of the creatures lifted its head and sniffed the air, just like she had once done. Jake realized something cold in his chest. They were hunters, and they were looking for something or someone. Maybe Thalara, maybe him, maybe both. He whispered again, "Why now?" But again she stayed silent. Instead, she pulled a small blade from a pouch at her side, curved and glowing faintly blue. She handed it to him without a word. It felt warm in his hand, like it knew him already. He shook his head, trying to give it back, but she closed his fingers around it and held them there. Then she touched her own chest, then his, and pointed at the ridge. The message was clear. If they found them, they would not ask questions. There would be no time to run, no place to hide. Suddenly, one of the hunters below let out a shriek, sharp and metallic. It turned its head in their direction, and others followed. They had picked up the scent. Jake and Thalara slipped back from the ridge as fast as they could, running now, dodging trees, jumping over roots. Jake stumbled once, and Thalara grabbed him before he fell. But the sounds behind them were growing louder. A spear flew past Jake's shoulder and stuck into a tree with a thud. He turned, heart racing, and saw one of the hunters rushing forward. Its legs bent wrong, its arms too long. Thalara roared a sound so powerful the air shook. She stepped in front of Jake and swung a thick branch like a club. The creature dodged it and slashed at her leg. Blood hit the ground, black and steaming. Jake charged without thinking. Blade raised, he swung wildly, but the weapon seemed to guide itself. It cut through the hunter's arm like soft metal. The creature screamed and fell back, twitching. Thalara stomped on its chest, crushing it flat, but she was bleeding now badly. She dropped to one knee, breathing hard, her body shaking. Jake ran to her side, trying to stop the bleeding with his hands. The wound pulsed under his fingers, heat rising from it. He shouted her name again and again. Her eyes fluttered, but she reached up and touched his face. Then she whispered one word, slow and broken. "Stay." The jungle was still again for a moment. Jake looked around and saw no more movement. No more hunters, at least for now, but they would return. He dragged Thalara behind thick vines, found shelter under a twisted root. He tried to patch her wound using pieces from his uniform. She winced but said nothing, just kept watching him. Hours passed. The sounds of searchers faded. Thalara slept, her chest rising and falling slowly. Jake sat beside her, weapon in hand, eyes fixed on the darkness. He thought about what she had said, only one word. But it meant more than any sentence. She didn't tell him to run. She didn't tell him to leave. She wanted him to stay, even if she was dying. He looked down at the blade she had given him. Its edge still glowed, and strange letters danced along its side. He knew now this place was not just about survival. It was about choosing a side, and his choice had already been made. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat beside Thalara as the wind moved through the jungle like whispers from a world long gone. She was still breathing, but slower now. Her blood had stopped flowing, but the wound was deep. He had done what he could, wrapped it tight. used fire to seal the skin. She had barely moved since then, only small twitches and soft breaths. Jake stared at her face, the face that had once terrified him. Now it was the only thing keeping him steady as the twin moons sank low. The jungle lit with small white insects that moved like floating dust. One of them landed on the blade he held, and the glow on the metal grew stronger. Jake turned the blade in his hand and saw something change, symbols rising from its surface. They hovered above the blade like smoke, turning slowly in the air. One of the symbols matched a shape he had seen in the cave beneath the word arrival. It pulsed with light, then faded. Jake stood slowly, suddenly sure of something he couldn't explain. He had to go back to the cave. Thalara needed rest, and it was too dangerous to move her. Jake pulled branches and leaves around her body, covering her gently. He left a small light near her head, a shard of glowing stone from the ridge. Then he ran, blade in hand, through the dark jungle. His feet followed a path he barely remembered, guided by instinct or maybe something deeper. When he reached the stone wall, he didn't hesitate. He touched the spiral sun symbol, and the door opened without sound. Inside, the air was still warm, the crystals still glowing. He ran to the console and inserted the blade into the same slot Thalara had used before. The chamber responded instantly. The hologram returned, this time larger, clearer. It showed Earth again, then the red markers moving closer, but now the image changed, showing the hidden code behind the map. Jake reached out, touched the floating symbols, and they shifted. A message played in a voice that sounded old and broken. "If you are hearing this," the voice said, "the treaty has failed. Only the chosen can reactivate the bridge. Only with the Guardian's bond can the seal be broken." Jake stared at the words as they repeated again. He didn't know what the bridge was, or the seal, but he knew one thing: he had the blade. And Thalara was the Guardian. He moved to the back wall, where a panel waited, shaped like a human hand. He pressed his palm against it, and it turned red. "Bond incomplete," the machine said. Jake pulled the blade from the console and stepped back, heart racing. He understood now. Thalara wasn't just his protector, she was the key. And he was part of something he had never been told about. Something buried in Earth's forgotten missions. Something that had always been waiting for him to arrive. He ran back through the jungle, the path now feeling familiar. The trees bent overhead, and the insects parted like they knew him. When he reached Thalara's hiding place, he dropped to his knees beside her. She was still breathing, but weaker. Jake held her hand and whispered her name. Her eyes opened slowly, cloudy at first, then sharp. He held the blade in one hand and pressed it to his own chest. "Thalara," he said. "I saw it. I saw the bridge, the seal. I need you. They need you. We have to stop them." She stared at him for a long time, then touched the blade. It glowed brighter than before, the symbols dancing wildly in the air. She pressed her hand to his, and the light from the blade moved over their skin. Pain shot through Jake's body, not sharp but deep, like something inside was waking up. Thalara whispered words in her old tongue, and the jungle grew silent again. The bond had been made. The earth rumbled, but not from hunters this time. It was something deeper, something ancient waking beneath them. Jake helped Thalara stand, her strength slowly returning as the bond completed. She looked at him with something more than respect now, not just as a lost human, but as her chosen. Together, they turned toward the mountain, where the stars once pointed and the old bridge waited. The war hadn't started yet, but the pieces had begun to move. Jake no longer wondered why he had survived the crash. He knew now. He hadn't just fallen here. He had been called. The mountain rose like a broken tooth at the edge of the world. Dark clouds swirled above it, and the wind howled like something ancient was crying. Jake and Thalara climbed its side slowly, each step shaking loose stones and memories. The blade pulsed in Jake's hand. Brighter with every step, Thalara moved with care. Still wounded but stronger now, their bond had done something neither of them fully understood. It connected them, not just in spirit, But in purpose, at the top of the mountain, they found the ruins of a forgotten gate. It was massive, built from both alien stone and human steel, covered in dust, vines, and battle scars. The symbols on the gate glowed faintly as they approached. Then the sky roared, and a ship broke through the clouds. Like a falling star. It was not human, and it was not peaceful. Its engine screamed as it lowered above the gate, and from its dark belly, hunters poured out, armor shining, weapons ready. Jake raised the blade, but his hands shook. Thalara stepped in front of him. Arms wide, voice loud. She shouted in a language the hunters understood. They paused for a moment, confused, listening. Then their leader stepped forward, taller than the others, with 4 red eyes and a broken mask. He answered her words with laughter, the kind that tasted like hate. He pointed at Jake, then made a slicing motion across his throat. Jake gripped. The blade tighter, heart pounding. This was the moment everything had led to. Not a battle for survival, but for meaning. The gate behind them began to hum, reacting to their presence. Thalara turned to Jake and placed her hand on his chest. She whispered one word, "Now," then she ran forward. Roaring like thunder made flesh, the hunters charged, but she was faster. Her strength returned fully now, fueled by something ancient and powerful. Jake ran after her, the blade glowing like fire in his grip. He didn't know how to fight like them, but something inside him did. His body moved before his thoughts, striking, dodging, blocking, every time the blade touched metal. It cut deeper than it should. It sang when it moved, like it had waited years for this moment. One by one, the hunters fell, but not without a price. Thalara was struck across the side, but she didn't stop. Jake screamed her name and threw himself. Between her and the leader, the hunter raised his weapon, but the gate behind them flashed like lightning. Energy burst from it, lifting both Jake and Thalara into the air. The gate opened not like a door, but like a wound in the sky. Through it, stars shimmered and voices echoed, old voices, human and not. The hunter screamed, trying to flee. But it was too late. The light pulled him in, tearing his mask away. What was beneath it was no face, only shadows and rage. The gate swallowed him whole, then closed with a sound like thunder turning into breath. Silence returned, broken only by the soft sound of rain beginning to fall. Jake fell to his knees, the blade now cool and still. Thalara stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. She looked at him not as a savior or soldier, but as something more equal, chosen, necessary. Then she spoke clear and slow, her voice steady in English. "The gate is closed," she said, "but the war is not over." Jake looked up at her, blood on his face, dirt in his hair, and fire in his eyes. "I'll stay," he said, and he meant it. They walked down the mountain side by side. The jungle below waited for them. Alive with sound, somewhere beyond the stars, Earth still turned, unaware of what had just been saved. But Jake was no longer just from Earth. He was part of something older, stranger, greater, and Thalara, the giantess he once feared, was no longer just a creature in the woods. She was his shield, his bond, his future. He thought she would eat him, but instead, she had awakened him.